The Time and Space of Uncle Albert by Russell Stannard. First published 1989 by Faber and Faber Limited. Chapter 6. The Biggest Surprise of All. "Oh," said Gedanken, "for a moment I thought we were moving." "Eh?" grunted Uncle Albert, sitting opposite her, head buried in his newspaper. "Oh, nothing, Uncle. I thought we were moving." "Moving? Don't say that we're off at last." Uncle Albert put the paper down and looked out of the train window. "We're not moving. We're still stuck here. What are you on about?" "I didn't say we were moving. I just thought we were. I saw the other train begin to slip past. I thought it was us moving, but it wasn't. It was them." "Oh," said Uncle Albert, and he settled back down to his paper again. It had been a lovely day. The two of them had been out sailing. Uncle Albert loved messing about in boats and had a little sailing boat all of his own. In fact, he was never happier than when he was out on the water. Wearing sandals and an old sweater, he would stand upright in the boat, rocking to the motion of the water. His face would be all screwed up in the wind, and he looked for all the world like a pirate. Gedanken wasn't all that keen on outdoor sports. Her parents were always on at her about getting more exercise, but the only thing she really liked doing was the sailing, and that was mostly because it gave her an excuse to spend more time with Uncle Albert. In truth, she was still just a tiny bit frightened of the water, but was gradually getting over it. They had been down to the sleepy coastal village where Uncle Albert had had his boat moored. Now, they were on their way back, but for some reason the train was late in starting. As Gedanken idly listened to the seagulls outside, she asked, "Why is that, Uncle?" "Eh?" asked Uncle Albert, still trying to read. "Why is it that you sometimes can't tell whether it's you moving or the others?" "Well, you can never tell, not if it's a steady motion." "But why not?" insisted Gedanken. "How am I expected to read my paper?" "Sorry, Uncle," she apologized. "Didn't mean to—" "Oh, no, that's all right. There's not much news anyway." He laid the paper to one side and looked out of the window at the station. "Why can't we tell if we're moving? If we were moving? Well, it's just the way things are, the laws of nature, the way things behave. They are the same for someone on the move as they are for someone standing still. Your cup stands on this table just as a cup stands on the table in the buffet over there," he said, pointing to the restaurant on the platform outside. "Knock this cup over and the tea spills in exactly the same way as it would on the table in the buffet. The train moving makes no difference." "But we do know if the train is moving," said Gedanken. "You get knocked about all over the place when you walk down the corridor. You have to hang on. You don't have to hang on to anything when you walk down the platform." That's different. That's because the trains don't go along steadily. They bounce around, speed up and slow down, and go around corners. I'm talking about steady, smooth motion, going in a dead straight line at exactly the same speed, like an aircraft cruising." "Or my spacecraft." "Oh, yes, like your spacecraft. That's an even better example, actually. Once your engine is off, you don't even have the vibration of the engine to give the game away." "And you say there's no way at all of telling whether you're moving or standing still?" "That's right. If you carried out an experiment in the spacecraft, some very precise scientific experiment, to try and find out whether you were moving or just standing still, it doesn't matter what it is, you would get exactly the same result flying close to the speed of light as if you did the same experiment here on Earth." "And there'd be no difference at all?" "None whatsoever," Uncle Albert said, adding, "It's because of the laws of nature, the mathematical way we scientists describe what's going on. They are exactly the same when you are on the move as when you are not." "Well, then how come we do know it's the spacecraft moving and not the Earth?" "We don't." "But we do." "No, we don't," said Uncle Albert emphatically. "For a start, the Earth is going round the sun, right? That must be something like, let's say 70,000 miles per hour. Then the sun is moving relative to the stars, so that adds on a little bit more. So the Earth isn't standing still. All you can say is how fast the spacecraft goes relative to the Earth. It doesn't tell you who is actually doing the moving." "Well, that's silly. We do know it's the spacecraft that's really moving and not the Earth, insisted Gedanken. It's obvious. Obvious? Said Uncle Albert with a smile. Well, yes, Uncle. All you've got to do is ask which time gets affected by the motion. And it's spacecraft time, right? Spacecraft time slows down, Earth time stays normal. Or take space. Whose space is affected? It's the spacecraft that shrinks. The Earth stays normal. So it's the spacecraft that must be the one that's actually moving. Uncle Albert stopped smiling. But, he began, but the words died on his lips. He stared at her, and then out of the window, and soon became lost in thought. Even the jerk of the train, as it at last started to move, did not shake him out of his thoughts. As they rattled towards home, Gedanken watched with amusement, as from time to time he would slightly shake his head and murmur, "No, but that can't be right." After a moment, Gedanken got a little worried. "Hey, Uncle, you're not beginning a big think, are you?" "Uncle, not here. The thought bubble. It's beginning to come. Stop it. What if someone comes in and sees it?" Yes, sorry." After a while, his eyelids began to droop a little. It had been an exhausting day out in the open air, and now the rocking of the train made him drowsy. His head slowly started to sink. It jerked up for a moment, and then sank down again. A gentle snore, a gentle whistle, and he was fast asleep. Gedanken leant forward. Her eyes grew wider and wider. She stared at Uncle Albert. "The pig! The pig!" she yelled. Uncle Albert shook himself awake and sat up. What? The pig? Where?" He looked about him. What are you on about?" But Gedanken was helpless with laughter. She just sat there, doubled up, and pointed at him. Eventually, she managed to recover herself enough to get out, "It was you." "Me?" "Yes, you're the pig. You're the flying pig." Uncle Albert was beginning to get a little cross. At the best of times, he did not like being suddenly woken up. "Whatever is the matter with you, Gedanken?" "You were snoring. It wasn't really a pig at all. It was you. You must have fallen asleep during that last space trip. That's why the spacecraft went out of control. And I thought..." And once again she collapsed into giggles. After a while, Uncle Albert couldn't help himself. He too began to chuckle. He was as relieved as she was that the mystery had at last been cleared up. "Uncle!" called out Gedanken as she burst in through the open back door, dumping her school bag in the corner as she did so. "Uncle, I'm here," she announced. "So I see," said Uncle Albert. He was sitting at the kitchen table having his tea. "What's that?" he said, pointing an accusing finger at the bag. "Do I take it that you haven't been home yet?" "No, I didn't have time." "Then ring your mother so she knows that you are here. Ask her if you can stay for tea." Gedanken stumped out to the hall, where the telephone was, thinking to herself, ring your mother, why does everyone treat me like a silly schoolgirl instead of an astronaut, an experienced astronaut, someone who's travelled millions and millions of miles on her own? Returning a little later, she came and sat down at the table. "Mum says I can stay for tea, if you're sure that's all right with you." "And provided you don't make a nuisance of yourself?" Uncle Albert asked, laughing. "How did you know that?" she smiled. "Tuck in. Help yourself to the meat and salad. There's plenty of trifle and cake after that, so leave room." "Oh, thanks, Uncle," she said. "It looks really good." She always enjoyed tea with Uncle Albert. He never made you eat your way through mountains of bread and butter before you could get to the really good things. "How was school today?" he asked. "Terrible. You know that Frances Alexandra, the one doing the project on volcanoes? Well, she's been cheating. Do you know what she's been doing? She's been photocopying great big chunks out of a book. That's all she's done. Photocopying the pictures and copying out the writing in longhand. I know this because I saw her do it. It's no wonder her folder looked good. But none of it's her own work. Not really. Don't you think that's cheating?" Well, yes, I suppose so. It's not fair. There's Alison been getting her stuff about dinosaurs from lots of different books and trying to write it all out in her own words, which is how you're supposed to do it, isn't it? Yes, if you say so. As for Darryl Curtis, well, he's so stupid, doing a project on the benefits of computers for mankind, and all he's written about is space invaders and computer games and all that. What good is that to mankind? Anyone would think that it was the only use of computers. Don't you think that's stupid? Well, I'm beginning to wish that I hadn't actually asked, mumbled Uncle Albert. What? Hadn't asked what? How you got on at school today? Oh, said Gedanken. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on. And so she went back to eating her tea. Anyway, how did your project go? She asked. Mine? Yes, your talk to those scientists about all our discoveries. Oh, they were very interested. A bit put out to discover that what they had been taught at school now turns out to have been wrong, but they were interested all the same. He got up and started to do some washing up. The trouble is, he began. Yes? Asked Gedanken. Oh, nothing. No, what were you going to say, Uncle? Oh, it's just there is one loose end, something that doesn't quite fit. I still don't feel we really understand what's going on. Why? Well, in a way, it's your fault. Mine? Exclaimed Gedanken. What's it got to do with me? Well, it's what you said on the train the other day, about it being possible to tell that it really was the spacecraft that was moving and not the Earth, because it was spacecraft time that lagged behind the Earth time, and not the other way around. Well, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't we be able to tell which one's moving? I don't know. It just doesn't seem right to me. It seems odd that every single scientific experiment we know of works equally well whether we are moving or not, except this one. For some reason, this is the one place where there is a difference. It smells fishy, and I don't like it. So what are you going to do about it? Asked Gedanken. There's nothing I can do about it, Uncle Albert said. For a moment he looked at her, as if he were going to say something more, but then stopped. Instead he began stacking the plates. Finished? He asked, as he went to take her empty cup and saucer. Yes, Uncle, that was a lovely tea, thank you. But, Uncle. Yes? What were you about to say? What do you mean? Well, just then. You were about to say something. Well, I was just wondering. Yes? No, forget it. I can't really ask you, not after last time. Forget what? Well, there's only one way to clear things up, isn't there? You would have to go on another trip, but after last time I can hardly... His voice trailed off. Gedanken knew it. She had guessed this was what was on his mind. A slight shiver went through her as she remembered what it had been like, although they had laughed about it afterwards when they knew what had actually happened. That didn't really stop it from being terribly frightening at the time. Well, began Gedanken uncertainly, if you promise not to drop off to sleep again in the middle of it all. I promise. I will stay awake, said Uncle Albert. You are sure you don't mind? It is the only way. Okay, said Gedanken, making up her mind. What do you want me to do? Well, it is like this. Gedanken arrived in the spacecraft, clutching a blank videotape. Uncle Albert had given it to her just before he beamed her up. Welcome, Captain, called out Dick. Didn't expect to see you back after our last spot of trouble. How are you, Dick? Asked Gedanken. Fine, no real damage. All circuits back to normal. I'm my usual efficient self again. One of these days we computers will have to get together and see if we can't figure out a way of doing without scientists. Thoroughly inefficient, aren't they? Always causing trouble, even Uncle Albert. Uncle wants me to take some video pictures this time. Ah, yes, said Dick. Over there. It's pointing out of the side window. The camera's all set up for you. You just have to put your cassette into the recorder and switch it on when I tell you. He wants me to take pictures of the Earth. That's right. He's already got pictures of us from his point of view. Now he wants pictures of the Earth from our point of view. She loaded in the cassette before going back to the main control panel and settling into her seat. They blasted off and headed out into space. After they had gone some distance, they turned around, pointed the spacecraft towards the Earth again, and got up to speed once more. "We're going to fly past the Earth," said Dick. "But I can't see," said Gedanken. "The side window is all blocked up by the camera. I can't see out of it from here. So how will I know—"
"Not to worry. I'll give the word once we are alongside. You then start the camera with the remote control in front of you."
Resting on the control panel was a little box that hadn't been there on the previous journeys. It was labelled Video Camera Control. It had a switch with 2 positions, on and off. It also had a round knob labelled Zoom. "What do I have to do with this other knob?" she asked.
"Ah, yes. Once you've got a distant picture of the whole Earth, he wants you to take a close-up. So just turn the knob when I tell you. Right. Are you ready? The Earth is coming up on the right-hand side."
Gedanken reached out for the switch and waited.
"Cameras on," Dick called out. Wait for it. Wait for it. Zoom at the ready. Zoom now. Hold it. Hold it. Camera switch off. That should do it."
On arriving back at Uncle Albert's study, Gedanken gave him his cassette back. He loaded it into the video recorder, and Gedanken could hardly wait. "This is going to be fun," she exclaimed. "The Earth and everything is going to look all stretched out."
"Stretched out?"
"Well, yes. When you looked at the spacecraft and me, we were all squashed up and skinny looking. So when I look at the Earth and people down here, they're all going to look stretched out and flat."
"Well, I'm not so sure."
"And everything will be all speeded up." "Speeded up? Well, of course, my time is slowed down according to you, so yours will be all speeded up according to me. Everything happening down here will look speeded up. Everyone will be rushing around. Obvious."
Well, possibly. Let's see what we've got, shall we?"
He switched on the recorder. Up came the picture. At first it showed empty space, just a background of stars. Then, from the left-hand edge of the frame, there slid into view the Earth. As it did so, Uncle Albert's eyes opened wide. He started to laugh. And laugh, and laugh some more. "Of course, he cried, punching the air with his fist. "It had to be that way. It had to be." Gedanken looked dumbfounded. Her jaw dropped, and she stared at the screen in disbelief. She could hardly take it in. The Earth was not stretched out at all. Quite the opposite. It was all squashed up. "But that can't be right," she said in dismay. "Did you do the zoom?" "Ah, yes, here it is." As he spoke, the picture zoomed into a close-up. It showed a street. Everything was squashed up. The houses, the cars, and the people. In fact, the people looked as skinny as Gedanken had been in her spacecraft when Uncle Albert had taken pictures of her. But that was not all. "Ha ha!" cried Uncle Albert triumphantly. "How about that? Look at the way they're moving about, Gedanken." As they watched, they saw the people in the street, not rushing about speeded up as Gedanken had expected. They were going about in slow motion. Everything they did was slowed down, just as Gedanken's own movements in the spacecraft had seemed to slow down from Uncle Albert's point of view. And not only the people, the traffic lights changed slowly, the birds flapped their wings slowly. Everything was slowed down.
"This calls for a celebration," chortled Uncle Albert. "I'll go and make us a drink."
He scampered off to the kitchen and returned with 2 mugs of cocoa.
"Didn't like to say so before," he continued, "but I had a little suspicion, just the sneakiest suspicion, that this was how that it might turn out."
"Well, it's not what I expected," said Gedanken crossly, taking the mug. She pulled a face when she saw what was in it. "Well, that finishes my project. It's a mess, a total muddly mess. It's stupid. Wish I'd never started it."
"What did you say that for?"
"Well, it's all right for you. How am I supposed to explain that? What's Turnip going to say when he reads that my time goes slower than your time, but your time goes slower than mine? It's daft. Makes no sense at all. It'll look a right idiot."
"But why?"
"Oh, come off it, Uncle. You're not that thick. He'll want to know whose time actually went slower, won't he? What am I going to say?"
"But he can't answer that question."
"Of course he can answer that question," exclaimed Gedanken, getting more and more upset. "And he will ask that question. And what's more, I want to know what really happened. Who actually got slowed down and who actually got squashed up? Come on, answer me that. Uncle Albert chuckled. Calm down, and I'll try to explain. He put his mug down and thought for a moment. Yes, let's go back to the beginning. Forget all we have learned so far. Let's make a fresh start. Ready? Well, said Gedanken, if you're really going to explain, I reckon that you had better write this down, just to make sure that you get it right. Gedanken grudgingly got up and fetched a pencil and paper from Uncle Albert's desk. But eventually you will have to put it down in your own words when you come to write it up in your project, okay? She nodded. Right. We begin with a very simple idea. The speed of light, that is always the same. It doesn't matter whether you are standing still or moving. It doesn't matter whether the lamp is giving out the light is standing still or moving. The speed is always the same. Got it? Yes, said Gedanken, scribbling it down. The second idea is also very simple. You cannot tell whether you are standing still or moving in a straight line with a steady speed. I can move relative to you. You can move relative to me, but there's no way of deciding who is actually doing the moving and who is actually standing still. All movement is relative, okay? Gedanken stopped writing and looked up. I'm not so sure about that. Uncle Albert thought for a while, then he said, Remember when we were trying to get round that headland in the boat? You were looking down over the side of the boat at the water and said how fast we were going. And then I pointed out that the strong current around the corner and we were having to go against the current. And when we looked at the land, we were hardly moving at all. Exactly. Yes, I remember that. Well, then, we were actually moving, or were we not? We were moving relative to the water, yes. But because the water was moving relative to the land, we were hardly moving at all relative to the land. Someone on the land would have thought that our boat was standing still. I get that, said Gedanken. And then she looked puzzled again. But what about when I'm riding a bike? It's me moving, not you. I'm the one being worn out pedalling. Obviously it's me not standing still if I'm getting tired. Oh, yes, that it can be. If you walk up an escalator the wrong way, you can wear yourself out getting nowhere very easily. It's the one who stands still on the escalator that is actually getting places. Yeah, but when I'm on my bike and I pass you, I'm not just passing you, I'm passing all the houses, all the trees, everything. You're not seriously saying that I'm standing still and everything else is moving. Well, why not? The houses and the trees are fixed to the earth, but the earth moves relative to the sun, and the sun moves relative to the stars. Who knows? If you're pedaling along, your bike might well be the only thing that is actually standing still in the whole universe. You can't just tell. All movement is relative, I said, and that is the second important idea. In fact, why don't we give it a name? A name? Yes, let's call this second idea Gedanken's rule of relativity. "Oh, that's grand," exclaimed Gedanken, her eyes shining. "But why name it after me?" "Because it was you who pointed it out to me, in the train, remember?" "When the other train started moving and I thought it was us?" "Yes, precisely." "But, Uncle," said Gedanken, "everybody knows that. There's nothing new about that." "Well, maybe not. But we are the first people to think really hard about what it actually means. And everything we've discovered through your space trips comes from your rule of relativity. That and the idea that light always has the same speed." "Everything," said Gedanken. "Everything comes from those two ideas." "That's right." "But how?" "Well, in the first place, you can't have people catching up with light beams. If they did, then the light beam would seem to be standing still relative to them. But that goes against the first idea, the idea that the light beam has got to be travelling at the same speed. "And the only way to stop people catching up with light beams is if they get heavier." "Exactly." "Right, I see," said Gedanken, writing it down. "And what about time, slowing down and all that?" "Well, take the time that you went chasing after the beam of starlight. As far as I was concerned, the light beam was going at its normal speed, and you were going almost as fast, 0.999 times the speed of light, or something like that. To me, it seemed as though the beam was getting away from you very slowly. there was hardly any difference in your speeds. But, according to you, the light beam was travelling away from you at its usual speed. Obviously, the way I'm working out the difference in speed between you and the light beam is not the same as the way you're working it out." "Well, what do you mean?" Speed is the distance travelled in a certain time. Speed is 30 miles per hour, means you travel a distance of 30 miles in time of 1 hour. Now, if we do not agree about the speed of light beam in relation to you, that means the distances and times you use to work out speeds are not the same distances and times that I use. And, in fact, it turns out, as far as I'm concerned, that your time must be slower than mine, and your spacecraft distances are more squashed up than mine. According to you. Yes, according to me, said Uncle Albert. But then why did I see your time on Earth slow down instead of speeded up? That's because of the second idea, your rule of relativity, because we cannot tell who is actually moving and who is actually standing still. Whatever goes for me must go for you. If I see your time slowed down compared to mine, you must see my time slowed down compared to yours. If I say your spacecraft is squashed up, you must say my Earth is squashed up. But who's really squashed up? Who's really slowed down? Insisted Gedanken. Someone must be right, surely. No, said Uncle Albert. In order to say that someone was actually right, there would have to be an actual time and an actual space, one that everyone could agree on. Something we could compare other times and spaces to and say, this one agrees, that one doesn't. But there isn't. This is time and space according to me, and there is time and space according to you, and that is all. And this is because of my rule, murmured Gedanken. That is right, said Uncle Albert. Gedanken laid the pencil and paper aside, and became lost in thought. Suddenly she brightened. Hey, something just struck me, she said. You know when I went to Jupiter and my time was 40 minutes and yours was an hour and a half? Yes. Well, whilst I was making that journey, the Earth would have been squashed up, right? Yes, according to you it would be. Does that go for the distance between Earth and Jupiter? Would that have been squashed up too? Yes, for you it would have been about half the normal distance. Oh, great! That works out right, exclaimed Gedanken. Oh? Well, yes, after I got back, I looked up the return distance from Earth to Jupiter. It didn't make sense. I couldn't have done it. Not in 40 minutes. An hour and a half, yes, but not in 40 minutes. Not if I was to keep just below the speed limit. But if for me the distance was only half, that makes it okay. I could have done it after all. I do believe it's all beginning to fit together, Uncle. I am glad to hear it. Gedanken looked at the note she had made. I'm going to have to think some more about this, she said, but I reckon there's enough here now to finish off my project. 3 weeks passed. Gedanken was surprised to find Uncle Albert standing outside the school gates when she came out. Hello, Uncle, she said. What a lovely surprise. What brings you here? Well, I just happened to be passing when I saw everyone coming out, he said. I thought I'd wait a minute and say hello. Well, that's very nice of you, she said. They walked down the road together, Gedanken swinging her briefcase about. Much homework to do? He asked. None. It's last week of term. We don't get homework this week. Oh, by the way, he said casually, how did we get on? The project and all that? Gedanken smiled to herself. He wasn't just passing, she thought. He knew all along that I was going to get my project back and I'll turn it today. Couldn't wait to hear how it went, I suppose. Oh, all right. He gave it a B. A B? Exclaimed Uncle Albert indignantly. Is that all? What do you mean? A B's pretty good. I don't often get a B. Well, I don't know, grumbled Uncle Albert. What on earth do you have to do to get an A in your place? Win the Nobel Prize or something? I don't know, really. He said it was a bit too complicated. I reckon he didn't believe a word of it. Anyway, he gave me a commendation. A what? A commendation for originality. I think that's what he said. Oh,
said Uncle Albert. Not sure I get the hang of all this modern schooling. In my day you either got things right or you got them wrong. If you got them wrong, you were whacked. And if you got them right, well, you didn't get whacked. Well, at least not so often, anyway. They turned into the street where Gedanken lived, just round the corner from Uncle Albert. Frances Alexandra got an A, but we all know how she got that. Darrell Curtis wouldn't tell us what he got, but I peeped when he wasn't looking. He got a D-. Serves him right. He also had a C me. See what? Uncle Albert said, looking more and more confused. A see me. See the teacher? It means you're in trouble. Oh, right, said Uncle Albert, showing interest. Is he going to get whacked? Not these days, Uncle, said Gedanken with a sigh. That's prehistoric. Teachers aren't allowed to. Oh, right, I see. Alison got a C, but she made some pretty coloured dinosaurs in pottery. They reached the garden gate leading up to her house. There was one thing, Uncle, said Gedanken as they stopped. Oh? Yes, about my rule of relativity. You know how it says we can't tell who is really moving, so we can't tell whose time really goes slow? Yes. Well, Turnip wrote on my folder that we did know. When I got back from Jupiter, it was my clocks that were slowed down, not yours. Mine showed 40 minutes, yours 1.5 hours. That is a good point. Yes, he's put his finger on a very interesting complication there. Perhaps he's not so dumb after all, your teacher. Turnip knows his onions, eh? Uncle, said Gedanken, very funny. That's an old one, seriously. What's the answer? What complication? Your rule of relativity is only good for steady motion. We haven't said anything about what happens if someone changes their motion. Well, what do you mean, changes their motion? No one has changed their motion. I didn't, but you did. Me? I didn't change mine. I kept going at the same speed, said Gedanken. Not all the time. When you got to Jupiter, you had to turn around. You find your rockets to slow down, and then again to speed up to come back. You changed your motion. So what? Well, whilst you were changing your motion, your rule of relativity didn't apply to you. It applied to me all the time. So that's why I expected your clocks to turn out to be slower than mine. And they were. Now, the really interesting question is, how come you found my clock ahead of yours? Uncle, my clock, according to you, was going slow whilst you cruised steadily. Can I interrupt, Uncle? But when you were changing your motion, yes, perhaps then my clock speeds up. Uncle! Yeah, what is it? You were starting another think. I am? Said Uncle Albert, looking surprised. Yes, you are, and we haven't got time for it. Nick and I have promised to help Miss Simmons set up her stall this evening for tomorrow's school fete. Nick and I? That sounds promising. Gedanken blushed a little. And then I'm going on to French exchange to Paris for the whole of next week. Oh, said Uncle Albert. Suppose it can wait until we get back. He looked very disappointed. She wondered what she could do. Then suddenly she had an idea. Here, she said, rummaging in her briefcase, you can read this whilst I'm away. She pulled out the folder containing her project and handed it to him. You might even have a go at the quiz, she added mischievously. What quiz? Said Uncle Albert. You'll see. With that she lightly kissed him on the forehead and disappeared down the garden path to her house, calling out over her shoulder, See you when I get back. Later that evening, Uncle Albert was sitting at his desk, idly leafing his way through the project, when a sheet of paper sticking out of the folder caught his eye. He took it out and began to read. It was a letter from Gedanken to Mr. Turner. Scrawled across the top of it in red ink were the words, Gedanken, I have told you before about being disrespectful. J.T. Curious to know what this meant, Uncle Albert read on. He began to chuckle. It soon became clear why Mr. Turner had got cross. In the letter, Gedanken had set him a test to see if he had understood the project. The cheeky monkey, thought Uncle Albert, adding as an afterthought, I wonder how he got on. As he began to read through the questions himself, he absent-mindedly reached for a pencil and paper.